He woke to a dull thud, as if the world outside was screaming that something was about to collapse. The light was still dim, but sunlight tried to filter through the cracks in the blinds. His little heart was beating faster than the footsteps in the hallway. And before he even understood what was happening, he already knew something was wrong. His mother always said that when the silence is broken by a strange sound, it's God telling him to pay attention. And that day, the warning came in the form of 3 loud knocks on the front door. He ran to the kitchen, tripping over his own feet, and saw his mother standing there, pale, holding the coffee cup that trembled in her hands. Have you ever experienced a moment when everything seemed to stop, as if time held its breath? If this story has touched you, subscribe and turn on notifications. That way you won't miss a single detail of this journey that's just beginning. She looked at the boy with wet eyes but tried to smile. "It's going to be okay," she said without much conviction. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew that look. It was the same look she'd had in the hospital years ago, when the doctors told her he might not survive. A look of love trying to hide the fear. The knocking on the door repeated, this time firmer, more impatient. The boy cowered behind the sofa. His mother took a deep breath, walked to the door, and with a trembling hand turned the handle. When she opened it, 2 men in dark suits stood there, briefcases in hand, their eyes stone cold. They asked her name, but they already knew who she was. They showed her a piece of paper with many stamps and difficult-to-understand words. She tried to argue, but they didn't seem interested in listening. They said they were there to carry out an order. The boy understood only one thing. They wanted to take his mother. "No, please, sir. Don't take my mother, no," he shouted from the back of the room, his voice cracking with panic. One of the men looked at him, perhaps with a hint of compassion, but quickly looked away. The other said he had no choice, that it was a court order, and it had to be done now. His mother ran to him, hugged him tightly, and whispered prayers in his ear. "God is with us. God is with us," she repeated like a mantra. The boy could feel her heart beating fast, as if it were trying to escape from its own chest. And in that moment, he knew it wasn't a nightmare. It was real. The next-door neighbor appeared, looking unsure whether to help or walk away. He stood on the sidewalk, staring in disbelief. It was one of those scenes you only see in movies. Only now it was happening right there, in front of the blue house on the corner of Maple Street. The boy screamed, clinging to his mother's waist. She tried to calm him, but her voice faltered. The men told her she could carry a bag, but she had to go now. A black car waited on the street, its engine running. And time seemed to mock them, passing too slowly, too quickly. All at once. Inside her bag she put the Bible, his hairbrush, and a photo of the 2 of them in the park. That was all she could take. The rest would have to stay. Including her heart, which she left there in pieces on the living room floor. When they finally walked out the door, the boy tried to run after him. One of the men held him tightly, but he screamed even louder. "Don't take my mother. She didn't do anything. She's good, she loves me." And that's when things changed. A white car arrived, tires screeching, and a man in a light-colored suit got out. He carried a brown briefcase and walked quickly. The men with the mother stopped, confused. The new man flashed his badge. And suddenly everything stopped. The entire neighborhood was now outside. Doors opened, cell phones began recording. The commotion wasn't just the families anymore. It was everyone who witnessed the scene, and who couldn't understand how a mother could be taken like that, without warning, without compassion. The man in the light-colored suit entered the house without asking permission. He asked for a glass of water. He said he was a judge. And he looked into the boy's eyes as if he understood pain without words. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked calmly. The mother tried to speak, but her tears wouldn't let her. The judge asked the men to step back for a moment. He said that before carrying out any orders, he needed to understand. And that's when everything began to change. Even if no one knew it yet. The boy ran up to the judge and tugged at his sleeve. She protected me. Always. She was the one who saved me when I almost died. She never hit me. She never left me alone. She's the best mother in the world. Why are they taking her away?" The judge knelt down to the boy's level. And in that instant time began to breathe again. Everything fell silent. The mother, the neighbors, even the men in suits. Everyone waited for the reaction of that judge, who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. He asked to see the documents. He read them all carefully. He frowned. He asked why they hadn't consulted the child's medical records, or the caseworker in charge. The mood began to change. Those two men now seemed less confident. The mother was still crying softly. The boy wouldn't let go of her hand for anything. The judge then asked to enter the child's room. He wanted to see where he slept, where he studied, where he lived. He said he needed to look in detail at what the documents didn't show. Entering the nursery, he noticed the drawings on the wall. One showed him and his mother holding hands, with a rainbow in the background. In the corner, a verse written in marker. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." The judge touched the drawing with his fingers. He took a deep breath and looked back at the woman. "Are you religious?" he asked. She nodded. "That's what keeps me going, sir." He smiled but didn't answer. He returned to the room and asked to speak to the men of the court, alone. They argued, but in hushed tones. No one quite understood what was being said. All that was clear was that the judge was standing firm. The other two were disconcerted. One of them even rubbed his forehead nervously. The boy peered through the crack in the door, his heart racing. Suddenly the judge came out, looked at the mother and said, "It's not over yet. But you're not leaving here today. At least, not until this is reviewed fairly." And the boy ran to her, crying loudly, shouting, "Thank you, God." But he had no idea that this was just the beginning. Because what the judge would find in the following days would change not only that mother's fate, but the lives of many people involved, and perhaps even his own. No one wakes up in the morning and becomes a suspect. Her story began long before the knock on the door. And if anyone had stopped to listen, they would have understood that there wasn't a criminal there. There was a woman with scars, hope, and a heart stronger than many imagined. Her name was Sarah. She was born in Dayton, Ohio, in a simple house with a yard full of dandelions and memories of a childhood cut short too soon. Her father left when she was 7. Her mother, Mrs. Ruth, was a seamstress and lived with the Bible open in the living room, as if praying to heaven to take care of the rest. Sarah learned early on not to depend on anyone. Life taught her this hard. At 16, she started working at a diner on Main Street. She was the girl with a kind smile and polite words, but with a look that carried more sleepless nights than her age warranted. She got pregnant young. The boy's father was a local boy who promised eternal love and disappeared before the first ultrasound. Sarah didn't rebel. She cried. Then she took a deep breath and began preparing the crib alone. "It'll just be me, you, and God," she said, caressing her belly. In the maternity ward, she sang ancient hymns while waiting for contractions. "How great you are," she repeated softly. When she finally held her baby in her arms, she understood that the world could be cruel, but it could also offer miracles weighing less than 3 kilos and with hazel eyes. He named the boy Elijah, a prophet's name, promise, and he made a vow to God. "As long as I have breath, this boy will grow up surrounded by love." And so it was. Every bottle, every feverish night, every bedtime story, everything was done with a dedication few saw. She worked during the day and studied at night. He spent years working toward a nursing degree. Elijah was waiting for her in the church library, where his sister Susan let him draw and play while their mother tried to change her life. And for a long time, everything seemed to be going well. Then the pandemic hit. And with it, chaos. Sarah lost her job at the community hospital. Elijah got sick. It wasn't COVID, but it was serious. Kidney problem. And the plans for a peaceful life began to unravel, piece by piece. With her bills behind, she did what she never thought she would. She asked the government for help. She filled out forms, stood in lines, and begged for assistance. But the system was cold, low, and Elijah needed expensive medication. So she made another choice. She took a job no one wanted. She became a caregiver for a bedridden man on the other side of the city. She took 2 buses, stayed up all night, all to pay for her son's medicine. There was no time for rest, but there was faith. And it was this faith that kept her going, even when her body begged her to stop. One day her son came home from school sad. They told him he was the son of a poor, crazy woman. That hurt more than any sleepless night. Sarah hugged him tightly and said, "No matter what they say, my love, you are loved, and God has plans for you. Plans of peace." But there was something she didn't tell anyone. An old debt, left by an ex who used her name to take out loans. She tried to clear her name but failed. And when the debt arrived, with interest and legal threats, she didn't know they were preparing a lawsuit against her. That's how the legal nightmare began. A jumble of documents, a misplaced complaint, and her name appeared as a fraud suspect. But no one bothered to listen to her version. They just saw the papers and ignored the woman behind them. The new social worker, just arriving, didn't know the family's history. "You wrote a report based on cold data and assumptions. You said Elijah lived in an unstable environment. And the system believed it. Because sometimes the truth isn't what's right. It's what looks most organized on paper." Sarah tried to defend herself. She wrote letters. She sought legal help. But no one would listen to an unemployed single mother from Dayton. The public defenders were overwhelmed. And all the while, the case proceeded silently, like a storm about to explode. Even so, she didn't give up. Every night I read the Bible with Elijah. Their favorite verse was Jeremiah 29 verse 11. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for peace and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." They read and cried. Sometimes they laughed too, remembering the good times. The trip to the zoo, the picnic in the park, the time Elijah made a cake with salt instead of sugar and called it warrior cake. Each memory was a shield against despair. Sarah began keeping a journal. In it, she recorded every hardship, every prayer, every small miracle. One day, Elijah found the notebook and wrote a letter inside. "Mommy, you are my hero. If God were a person, I think he would have your face." She cried for hours after reading it. And she decided that, no matter what, she wouldn't let them take her boy. He was the reason for everything. And even if the world told her otherwise, she knew who she was. She knew what she did. And even more, she knew what she never did. But the case moved forward. The original judge retired. A new judge took over. And the men in black suits received the search warrant. Sarah didn't know that today would be the day of the knock on the door. But she felt something strange in her heart, like a divine warning. The morning before, she had fasted in prayer. She asked for guidance. She asked for protection. She asked God to be with Elijah no matter what. And deep down she knew. A spiritual battle was about to begin. And it wasn't just about her. It was about something much bigger. Because behind the accused mother, there was a woman who taught her son to bend his knees, who fought against statistics, who faced abandonment and poverty, and yet, planted hope like one cultivates flowers in a desert. Few in the neighborhood knew about all this. They only saw the tired woman, sometimes late, sometimes silent. But they didn't know about the nights of hidden tears, the love notes left in her son's lunchbox, the prayers said in the hospital hallway. And that's why, when the judge walked into that room and saw the boy's eyes, something in him shook. Because there are pains that can't be explained by laws. And there are stories that only God can translate. Sarah was that story. A living book, full of torn pages, but with chapters that could still be written. And maybe, just maybe, the next chapter wouldn't be one of pain but of justice. If only someone had the courage to read it with an open heart. The courtroom felt like a world apart. Cold, silent, almost cruel. Sarah held Elijah's hand tightly as they crossed the gleaming hallway. Each step echoed like thunder in her ears. Her son trembled, and the look of fear in his eyes hurt more than any sentence. In the waiting room, people whispered, lawyers tapped away on their laptops, and a security guard looked at everyone as if no one there was innocent. Sarah tried to maintain her composure, but her heart begged for a miracle. Elijah rested his head on her shoulder and whispered, "Will it work, Mommy?" She didn't answer. She just kissed his forehead. It was all she could do, because inside she was broken. The public defender hadn't arrived yet, and the social worker warned her that the prosecutor was rigid, with little patience for emotional cases. Her name was called over the loudspeaker. Sounded like a sentence. People looked up, some with pity, others with judgment on their faces. Sarah stood slowly. Elijah tightened his grip on her hand. "Shall I go with you?" he asked, almost voiceless. "You'll stay right out here with the lady who works here, okay?" But he wouldn't let go. Not this time. Not after everything. It was then that she heard the officer's voice. The child must remain in the waiting room. And panic began to rise in Elijah's small chest. "Please, let me go with her," he whispered. But there was no response. When a guard tried to gently pull him away, he screamed. Loudly, strongly, from the bottom of his heart. "Please don't take my mother away." The scream cut through the hallway like a bolt of lightning. Conversations ceased. The sound of the keyboard stopped. The silence was absolute. For a moment, everyone there became human again. The boy cried, kneeling on the floor, begging. And no one knew what to do. Sarah tried to run to him, but was restrained. "Ma'am, please stay calm." She screamed too. "He's just a child. He's scared." But no one seemed to hear anything but the echo of that scream. The boy's pain reverberated off the walls like a cry for help impossible to ignore. The judge, who was passing through the hallway, heard it. She stopped. She looked at the boy on the floor, hugging an officer's shoe. And for a second she hesitated. She called over an officer and asked for details of the case. The officer muttered something and pointed at Sarah. "Bring Mommy to my room now." The order was clear. And with that the atmosphere changed. All eyes turned to Sarah, who couldn't understand if that was good or bad. But one thing was certain. Her son's scream had broken through an invisible wall in that place. Elijah ran to her and hugged her tightly. "Mommy, stay with me." And she replied with what little voice she had left. "I'm here, my love. I'm here." The officer, now more gentle, led them both to the judge's chambers. And the world seemed suspended in time. Inside the courtroom, the judge watched them with a look that was hard to decipher. She ordered water and asked them both to sit down. And then she said something no one expected. "Before making any decision, I want to hear from you. Straight from the source. No intermediaries." Sarah looked at the public defender, who hadn't yet arrived. The judge noticed. "You can speak without him. I want to hear it from a mother to a woman." And there, before God and the laws of men, Sarah began to tell her story. In a way no one had heard before. She spoke of the abandonment, the struggles, the sleepless nights, the prayers. The salted cake, the verse painted on the wall, the notebook with her son's letters. And the boy next to her, filled in details only he knew. The judge listened in silence. But her eyes spoke volumes. "And why do you think you've gotten this far?" the judge asked. Sarah hesitated. But she answered honestly. "Because those who don't have a voice aren't heard. Because mothers like me only get attention when they scream. Or when our children scream for us." The judge closed her eyes for a second, as if feeling the weight of those words. Then she opened a folder. She looked at the documents. She flipped through a few pages. "Something's wrong here," she murmured. "Too many gaps." And for the first time there was room for hope. But the prosecutor knocked on the door. He hurried in, his expression serious. He asked to speak. He said there was sufficient evidence to maintain the case. He cited protocols, figures, opinions. And everything began to feel dense again. As if the system were pulling the reins of compassion. Elijah held his mother's hand. They both fell silent. But the boy's eyes remained pleading. And that's when the judge did something unexpected. She asked the boy to describe in his own words what it was like living with his mother. He spoke. And each word was an arrow to the hearts of those present. He spoke of the scent of lavender in their clothes, the notes hidden in their lunchboxes, the songs before bed. She's not perfect. But she's all I have. And I know she truly loves me. The prosecutor tried to interrupt, saying it was too emotional. But the judge silenced him with a gesture. The truth sometimes hurts more than emotion. And in this courtroom we can't ignore the truth. Then she asked for a break. She said she needed to think things through calmly. That something inside her told her the case deserved another look. And when Sarah left the room, she wasn't sure if it was a victory. But she knew she was no longer alone. Because that scream, that single scream of a desperate boy, had been worth more than 1,000 pages of defense. It had made justice look into the eyes of humanity. And maybe, just maybe, that scream still echoed in other hearts. In the waiting room, everyone was still silent, as if time had stopped there. Sarah hugged Elijah, feeling his heart still racing. And silently she prayed, "Lord, if this isn't the end, then give me the strength to carry on." Because the judge who would come next, and the decisions that would be made, would still bring much turmoil. But now there was a chink in the wall. And a mother with enough courage to go through it all for the love of her son. The hallway was still silent when the door slowly opened. A tall, grim-faced man in a light gray suit entered, carrying a weathered leather briefcase. His steps were firm but measured. His name was Thomas Whitaker, a federal judge known for his tough rulings and ruthless objectivity. No one expected him to show up. His name wasn't on the initial hearing list. But a technical error, a last-minute change, and he took over the case. A buzz started among the court staff. "He doesn't usually ease up on anyone," one of them muttered. Sarah looked at him with tired but steady eyes. Elijah, squeezed beside him, felt the tension rise in the air. The judge didn't smile. He didn't greet anyone. He just sat down, opened the folder and began reading, as if everyone there were just numbers and codes. The prosecutor stood first. She began her formal reading of the case. She cited laws, procedures, suspicions, reports. She spoke of potential neglect, an unstable environment, and risks to the child. It was as if she were describing another woman, one Sarah didn't recognize. The judge listened without interrupting. He only nodded slightly, as if he had already made up his mind. Sarah swallowed hard. It wasn't the first time she'd seen someone judge her before even hearing her voice. But this time it was different. He was the one with the power to decide everything. When it was the defense's turn, the public defender still seemed unsure. His speech was halting, and he had little knowledge of the case history. Sarah closed her eyes for a second. "Lord, be my voice," she prayed silently. Because what was at stake wasn't just her freedom. It was her son's future. The judge looked up for the first time and stared at Sarah. For a moment time stood still. "Do you have anything to say before I make my preliminary ruling?" His voice was firm, but there was a subtle note of curiosity. As if, deep down, he wanted to hear a truth the papers didn't tell. She stood up slowly. Her son held her hand, but she reassured him with a look. She took a deep breath and spoke. "My name is Sarah, and I'm a mother. I'm not perfect, but everything I've done in life, I've done to protect my son. Because if I fall, he falls with me." The judge didn't look away. Sarah told him about her son's illness, the debt someone else owed in his name, and her attempts to get help. She talked about the Bible she read with Elijah, the hymns she sang to him to sleep. She concluded by saying, "If they take me today, he'll lose more than a mother. He'll lose the last pillar he has." There was a deep silence after that. Elijah, his eyes filling with tears, whispered softly, "She always protected me." And the judge leaned back in his chair, as if something in him had changed. But no one knew yet what he would do. He then called a break. He left the room with the same serious expression. But in the hallways he spoke with a staff member. He requested access to old documents. He called the social worker. And little by little, he began to piece together a puzzle that no one else was willing to solve. Meanwhile, Sarah and Elijah waited in the anteroom. She was trembling. The boy tried to distract her by drawing on the back of a pamphlet. He drew a house, a tree, and himself and his mother smiling. "That's what I dream of, Mommy. Even if it doesn't happen, that's what I want to remember." The judge returned half an hour later. He asked for silence. Then he began speaking. He said there were inconsistencies in the report, that the case appeared to have been rushed, and that, by law, he couldn't make a final decision without further investigation. "But that doesn't mean you're free," he added. Sarah's heart sank. It wasn't the end yet, but it wasn't the worst either. The judge then proposed a precautionary measure: supervised monitoring, a home visit, and a 30-day period for reevaluation. Because no one should be separated from their family without absolute clarity. Some in the room disagreed. The prosecutor scowled. But the judge was firm. The role of justice is not to punish before understanding. And what I saw here today forces me to look more carefully. It was the closest thing to compassion the man had ever shown in his years of service. Sarah nearly fell to her knees. Elijah hugged her tightly. But the judge still had more to say. "If we find that you lied or omitted facts, there will be serious consequences," he added. "But if what I saw today is true, we may be facing an unforgivable systemic error." The hearing was over. But something was different now. It wasn't just temporary relief. It was the feeling that a wall was beginning to crack. That someone finally was willing to listen with their heart, not just with their legally trained eyes. As they left the courthouse, Elijah asked, "Mommy, will the judge help us?" She looked at him, holding back tears. "Son, I don't know. But today he really saw us. And that is a start." In the hallways, the murmur changed. Some people were talking about the case. A woman commented, "There's something different about this story." And a man replied, "There's something of God involved. It has to be." Sarah was called back to sign the documents. But before she entered, she saw the judge talking to someone on the phone. The words she heard were few, but they stuck with her. "This case needs human eyes. Not just technical ones." She kept that phrase in her heart like someone keeping a promise. Because she knew the road ahead would still be long. But now, at least, there was a light at the end of the tunnel. And maybe, at the end of this road, what awaited them was greater than she imagined. Because what came next would reveal truths hidden years ago. And a new battle would unfold, this time outside the courtroom. A battle that would touch powerful people. And Sarah's past. That same night after court, Sarah couldn't sleep. Elijah was already in bed, hugging the Bible she always kept on her nightstand. But her sleep was disturbed by restlessness. Because, even with the chance to start over, she knew there were ghosts from the past waiting to surface. At the bottom of the drawer, hidden beneath old documents, was a battered envelope. It was from the time everything started to go wrong. She couldn't bring herself to throw it away, but she also couldn't open it without feeling her throat tighten. That night, however, something made her pick up the envelope again. Inside were papers with names she'd rather forget. Forged signatures. Debts in her name. And most painful of all, a copy of a contract that cast doubt on her integrity, even though she'd never authorized any of it. She knew where it came from. And who it came from. The name was clear. Michael Carter, Elijah's biological father. The man who swore eternal love and ran away in the 3rd month of her pregnancy. He used her name to get credit, took the money and disappeared. He left Sarah with debt, shame and a child on the way. And no one believed her at the time. The case was registered but never progressed. Michael disappeared without a trace. She tried to clear his name, but the banking institutions said it was between her and him. as if justice only existed for those with a strong surname or expensive lawyers. And what she didn't know until that moment was that Michael Carter was back in town. A neighbor saw him. He said he was now using the name Mike Reynolds and worked at a small security firm. Sarah felt her blood run cold. If he were back, he could very well be involved in all of this. The next day, she decided to investigate on her own. She asked her church friend Rebecca to drive her to the address she'd given. It was a small office building in Cincinnati. She stood across the street, wearing a cap and sunglasses. When she saw that familiar face coming out of the building, she nearly fell over. It was him. Older. Gray hair. But the same arrogant walk. She remembered the day he'd left her at the clinic door, saying he'd be back in 15 minutes. And never did. Now he walked freely, calmly, as if nothing had happened. Sarah returned home with a knot in her stomach. She didn't tell Elijah. But she prayed silently, asking for discernment. She knew this man could still hurt. And the fear returned like an old shadow she thought she'd left behind. 2 days later he received a call. It was from the court. Judge Whitaker had requested access to all old bank records related to the case. And among the papers, a name resurfaced. Michael Carter. The judge now knew there was more to the story than the report said. She was called into his office for an informal meeting. The judge opened the documents one by one. This man is linked to every debt in your name, Sarah. Why didn't you ever officially report him? She took a deep breath. Because no one ever wanted to listen. Not even when I brought the documents. The judge looked at her more intently than ever. He said that if the information was correct, she wasn't guilty, she was a victim. And that perhaps the system had failed her long before this case began. Are you willing to testify against him? Fear came like a thunderclap. But Sarah looked to the window, where the late afternoon light illuminated the Bible on the table. And she said, I am. Because if I don't do this now, he could destroy other lives. And silently she prayed, Lord, go with me. The judge appointed an investigator. Someone from outside the county. Someone uninvolved in the mistakes of the past. Her name was Jennifer Ross. And she took her job seriously. When she met Sarah, she promised, if there's truth here, we'll find it. In the following days, Jennifer discovered more than she expected. Michael had used Sarah's name on at least 3 other contracts, including a car rental that was involved in an accident. None of this information had been considered in the original process. Sarah began receiving anonymous threats, silent phone calls at night, locked doors that appeared open in the morning. She knew they were trying to silence her. But now there was no turning back. The past was coming to light. And she was willing to face it. Elijah sensed his mother's tension. He asked if everything was okay. She hugged him tightly and said, You are my son. Yes, you are. Because God is fighting for us. But deep down, she knew the next few days would be the hardest of her life. Jennifer gathered enough evidence to file a new lawsuit. This time against Michael. And in the midst of all this, the social worker who had prepared the initial report resigned. Rumor had it she knew about the connection between Michael and one of the legal representatives in the case. The web was bigger than anyone imagined. Corruption, favoritism, neglect. Sarah was just one piece. But now the truth was coming out. And there were powerful people who didn't want that to happen. Judge Whitaker ordered increased security for Sarah and Elijah. He said the case had changed levels. Now we're not just talking about custody. We're talking about a possible systematic crime. The tension was rising. But Sarah didn't waver. She returned to writing in her journal. She wrote as in the old days. Words mixed with faith, fear, and hope. She wrote of God's invisible hand protecting those who cry out for justice. And she ended with a sentence. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear. At school, Elijah began seeing a counselor. He had nightmares for a few nights. But the teacher said he spoke of his mother as if she were a shield. My mother is made of prayer and courage, he said one day. unaware that anyone was listening. The community also began to move. The local church held a prayer vigil for Sarah. Neighbors who had previously been judgmental now came together. Because when truth begins to emerge from the dry ground, it blossoms in unexpected places. Michael, upon learning of the lawsuit, tried to flee. But he was tracked down at a gas station in Indiana. He was arrested for fraud, fraudulent misrepresentation, and violation of court orders. When Sarah found out, she didn't feel revenge. She felt relief. And a strange peace. Judge Whitaker ordered an immediate stay of the custody proceedings. He said all decisions would be reviewed. And for the first time, Sarah heard the words she'd been waiting for. "You have been wrongfully accused. And this will not go unpunished." But even so, she knew the journey didn't end there. Because the emotional damage, her son's pain, the social stigma, all of this still needed healing. And that kind of healing only time and God could offer. What she didn't know yet was that something Elijah had been keeping hidden was about to change everything again. Something he'd written in a school notebook, unseen by anyone. Something that, in just a few words, would reveal the depth of a child's love and a mother's strength. The courtroom was silent that day, but Sarah's heart was in turmoil. She felt that, despite her recent victories, something inside her was still fighting to keep from falling apart. It wasn't about the evidence anymore. It was about her soul. About staying strong when everything inside screamed for her to give up. That morning when she woke up, she felt an inexplicable urge to sing. It was an old hymn, one her mother used to sing on the most difficult mornings. "I am happy with Jesus, my Lord." She began softly, her voice hoarse, as she prepared the coffee. And little by little, peace returned. Elijah appeared in the kitchen. His eyes still sleepy, but with a peaceful smile. "You're singing, Mommy," he said. "Is it because we won?" She smiled, unsure of how to respond. Because victory sometimes isn't an end. It's just a pause in the midst of war. During the week, she returned to church. She sat in the back pew, as she did when everything seemed to be falling apart. The pastor preached on Job. And with each word, she felt as if God were stitching together the torn pieces of her soul with invisible thread. "The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." That echoed within her. Because even when everything was taken away, dignity, security, even the right to be a mother, she still had something no one could take away: faith. That night at home, she and Elijah did something they hadn't done in months. They prayed together out loud. He placed his small hand over hers and said, "Thank you, God, for letting me be with my mother, and for sending a judge who has real eyes." Sarah wept as he spoke. It wasn't a cry of fear, nor of anger. It was a pure cry of relief, of gratitude. Because when a child prays like that, it's impossible not to believe that heaven is listening. The next day, Elijah took a notebook to school with a hidden note. It was for his teacher. It said, "If you're afraid, do like my mother. Come on. Even if no one listens, God listens. He always listens." The teacher was so moved that she read the note in the staff room. And from there, a silent wave of support began to emerge. An invisible network of faith began to form around that family, made up of ordinary people, but driven by something much greater. Sarah began writing scriptures on post-it notes around the house. One on the refrigerator door: "Cast all your anxiety on him, for he cares for you." Another on the bathroom mirror: "Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning." Each day she wrote a different promise. And each day she felt she was no longer fighting alone. Even with the pain, the ongoing lawsuits, the still suspicious looks, there was a peace that made no human sense. And this, she knew, came from above. One afternoon, while folding clothes, the phone rang. It was Jennifer Ross, the investigator. She said she'd found a letter Michael had written years ago, trying to manipulate the system against Sarah. "It's the smoking gun," Jennifer said. "You were used." Sarah fell to her knees on the laundry room floor. Not in sadness, but in gratitude. "Thank you, Lord, for showing me the truth in your time." Not mine. Elijah appeared in the doorway and asked, "Is everything okay, Mommy?" And she replied, her eyes shining, "Better than ever, my love." At Sunday service, the pastor called on her to give a brief testimony. She hesitated but then stepped up. And when she took the microphone, her hands were shaking. "I've lost a lot in the last few months. But I've never lost God's presence. And if I'm here today, it's because He never left me." The church was moved. Some women wept silently. Men bowed their heads. Because it wasn't just Sarah's story. It was the story of many. Mothers, grandmothers, daughters. People who carried the world on their shoulders and still found room to carry their children in their hearts. After the service, a woman approached. "My daughter went through something similar. I almost lost my faith. But seeing you, I'm starting to believe again." Sarah hugged the woman as if she were family. Because in that moment she was. Elijah began drawing more. His drawings now featured crosses, joined hands, and rays of sunshine. When the therapist asked what they meant, he replied, "It's God watching over us, even when we can't see it." The therapist wrote it down with tears in her eyes. Judge Whitaker learned of the events and asked to see Sarah again. At the meeting, he looked directly at her and said, "You're no longer just a name on a lawsuit. You're a woman who survived a war." And she did it with faith. She replied simply, "It was God, sir. I just held on tight." And at that moment the judge, a serious man not given to emotions, looked away for a moment, as if he were holding something he hadn't let on for a long time. He then said he would submit a personal report to the higher court, recommending a complete dismissal of the case and public reparations for Sarah. Not just for legal justice, but for moral justice, and spiritual justice as well. Sarah left the building, her eyes on the sky. The wind blew slowly, and everything in her told her something new was about to begin. But as in every good story, there was one last twist. Because as she walked to her car, a man watched her from afar. A man she hadn't seen in over 30 years. And the reunion that would change everything was yet to happen. That morning everything seemed so calm. Sarah was making pancakes while Elijah was working on a puzzle in the living room. The house breathed a quiet peace, the kind that only exists between two storms. And even without knowing what was coming, she felt something different in the air. The phone rang at 9:10 in the morning. It was Jennifer, the investigator. "I need you to come to the county clerk's office today. There's something you need to see for yourself." Sarah didn't ask any questions. She just said, "I'm coming." Because when God starts moving things, there's no time to waste. Elijah stayed with the neighbor. Sarah put on her best blouse, tied her hair neatly back, and put her Bible in her bag. She always did this when her heart was restless. It was like carrying an invisible shield. And that day she knew she would need it. Upon arrival, she was taken to a private room. Jennifer was there, her expression serious but her eyes shining. "We found a sealed document deep in the state archives. It was from an old case. You need to read it." Sarah opened the envelope with trembling hands. It was a will. From someone named Helen Carter. Elijah's paternal grandmother. A woman Sarah had never met. In the will, Helen stated that if anything happened to her son, Michael, custody of any children he fathered would go to the child's mother, Sarah. She didn't understand right away. "What does this change?" she asked. Jennifer replied firmly, "This document invalidates any future attempts by the Carter family to contest your custody. And what's more, it proves that Mrs. Helen recognized you as Elijah's sole legal guardian." Sarah felt her legs give out. She sat up slowly. It was as if an ancient door had been locked forever. A threat silenced. A weight lifted. "But why did it only come out now?" he asked. Jennifer took a deep breath. "Because someone hid it. And now they couldn't keep it hidden anymore." And then came the second surprise. Jennifer pulled out another envelope. Inside was a letter, handwritten, from Michael, dated 5 months before he fled. In the letter, He admitted to using Sarah's name. He asked for forgiveness and said that she never knew anything. Sarah began to cry, not out of relief but out of anger. Anger from so many years of living as a suspect, from being judged for something she didn't do, from seeing her son nearly taken away, for mistakes that weren't hers. "And this will be used?" he asked. Jennifer nodded. "It already is." That same day, Judge Whitaker called a special hearing. It was unusual, rare, but necessary. And when Sarah walked into that room once more, something about her was different. It wasn't fear anymore. It was strength. Strength born of survival. The strength of someone who has walked through fire and come out standing. The judge had the documents on his desk. He showed them to the prosecutor, who was visibly shaken. "Sir, this changes everything," she said. He simply replied, "Yes. That's why we're here." And then he addressed Sarah. "Today the truth has a voice. And it's yours." The prosecutor dropped the charges. The case was closed. Sarah was no longer under investigation. Elijah was no longer at risk. And a new hearing was scheduled to discuss moral and financial compensation. But at that moment none of that mattered. The impossible had happened. Sarah wept silently as Elijah ran into her arms. "Did we win, Mommy?" She hugged him to her chest and said, "Son, God won for us." And everyone there, even the most skeptical, felt they were witnessing something bigger than a lawsuit. Outside the courthouse, the press was waiting. Someone had leaked the story. But Sarah declined to give interviews. She simply said, "What matters is that my son is with me, and that God's justice always arrives. Sometimes it takes time, but it never fails." It was then that she saw a face in the crowd. A white-haired man in a simple suit, with an emotional look in his eyes. Sarah froze. "Dad," she said, her voice almost broken. It was James, the father who had disappeared when she was still a child, and who now, decades later, was here. He approached slowly, unsure if he would be welcomed. Tears were in his eyes. "I heard what happened. I couldn't stay away. Forgive me, my daughter." Sarah was silent for a moment. Then she took a step forward and hugged him. Long, like someone closing a circle. Elijah, not understanding, looked up and asked, "Is that my grandpa?" Sarah smiled, her eyes filling with tears. "Yes, you are, son." And James, through tears, knelt before his grandson and said, "You are the best thing that ever happened to our family." That same weekend, they gathered for a simple lunch at Sarah's house. The table was small but full of meaning. 3 generations sat together. So many wounds, so many reunions. And a feeling that pervaded the room. Gratitude. Sarah sang again, now with Elijah and James by her side. They sang old hymns, told stories, and laughed until their stomachs hurt. Because sometimes, the impossible isn't a miracle that comes down from heaven. It's a reunion, a reconciliation, a healing no one thought possible. But she knew not everyone would accept the outcome. There were still suspicious looks. People who said she was lucky. But Sarah no longer cared. Because now she knew the truth. And those who know the truth walk in peace, even in the midst of war. She wrote everything in her diary. Every detail. Every tear. And at the bottom of the page, she wrote a verse that now made even more sense. "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." And she slept that night with a lighter soul than she had in years. But not everything was resolved. Because among the documents found, there was a clue, a name. And that name, linked to past court decisions, indicated that someone within the system had helped conceal the truth. And that someone was still in a position of power. Elijah was always a quiet boy. Observant. The kind who understands much more than he says. While adults fought over paperwork, hearings, and deadlines, he observed everything with wide, attentive eyes. And he kept it. He kept it in his heart. And in his notebooks, too. At school, he was polite, shy, and always carried the same worn blue pencil he said brought luck. The teachers liked him. But no one knew exactly what was going on behind that shy smile. Until one day, the art teacher decided to open a box of old essays forgotten in the back room. It was part of a long-standing project, where children were asked to write a letter to someone you love deeply and are afraid of losing. When she read the letter, signed by Elijah, she felt a chill. The words were simple, yet charged with a maturity and pain no child should know. Dear God, if you take my mother, take me with you. I don't want to live without her. She is my home. I don't understand why she cries in secret. But I always listen. And I pray for her every night, even when she thinks I'm asleep. The teacher read the letter 3 times before she could breathe properly. It was more than a school essay. It was a cry for help. An intimate portrait of the soul of a child who carried the weight of the world on her small shoulders. She took the letter to the principal. And the principal, moved, forwarded it to Judge Whitaker. When he read it, he closed his eyes for several seconds. It was no longer a lawsuit. It was a life story. A boy who had found a silent way to cry out for justice. The judge ordered the letter to be attached to the case. But first he called Sarah and asked for permission. When she read it, she cried so hard she couldn't speak. Elijah stood beside her, curious. Mommy, was that the letter? The one I wrote to God? She just nodded. But I wrote that a long time ago, he said. I don't even remember anymore. Sarah hugged him so tightly he gasped. My son, you've been my strength all along. And you didn't even know it. And he replied with something she would never forget. It's because God used me to take care of you too. The judge then made an unexpected decision. He read the letter aloud during the closing session. With Sarah's permission. In the presence of lawyers, social workers, and reporters. And no one was indifferent. It was like hearing the very heart of a generation suffering in silence. Elijah became a symbol of something greater. A boy who, with a few words, revealed the failure of a system and the strength of a love that the world insists on underestimating. Journalists began seeking Sarah out. They wanted interviews, documentaries, headlines. But she turned down almost all of them. She only agreed to speak to a local church channel to tell them what really mattered. It was God. Only Him. My son's letter was a prayer in disguise. And the answer came at just the right time. And it spread like a light but unstoppable wind. The church pastor invited Elijah to speak briefly at the children's service. He came up shyly, with his blue pencil in his pocket. He took the microphone and said, I just wanted my mom to be with me. And God heard. So if you're afraid, pray too. Even if you're short. The children applauded. The adults wept. And Sarah realized that her son wasn't just hers. He belonged to the world. God had planted something profound in that boy. Something that touched effortlessly, healed without intention, and taught without knowing it was teaching. The therapist treating Elijah said he possessed something rare, above-average emotional intelligence and almost prophetic spiritual sensitivity. This boy is going to change lives. He already is. And Sarah silently was grateful. Amidst the chaos, Elijah began writing more. Journals, verses, prayers. One of them said, when pain knocks on your door, invite it in. Then you show it where God lives. His therapist asked permission to use this phrase in a school project. And it became a poster in the library. One afternoon, Sarah found a box under his bed. It was filled with drawings, notes, and prayer notes. One of them read, Lord, watch over my mother while she sleeps. Because she already takes care of everything herself during the day. She read it, hugging the bedroom door, trying not to make a sound with her tears. Because here was confirmation of what she'd always suspected. Elijah was more than a survivor. He was a small miracle walking around, bringing light to dark places. And yet, there was something she still didn't know. Elijah had been having dreams. And in the dreams he said he saw a man in shining clothes who told him, tell the truth, even if no one listens. God is listening. Sarah didn't know if it was just her childish imagination. But it made her shiver. One day Elijah said, "Mommy, I need to write a book. A book for other children who are afraid of losing their mother." Sarah helped him create the title with colored paper and glitter glue. He called it When Our Mother Is Our World. And so began something bigger than anyone imagined. The church offered to print some copies, and a school teacher distributed them at the community library. Soon, families began writing letters to Sarah. They said, "My son fell asleep with a booklet on his chest. My granddaughter asked if she could meet Elijah." But the most striking letter came from a shelter. A 9-year-old boy, separated from his mother, wrote, "I read what Elijah wrote. Now I pray every day for God to take care of my mother too. And I think he's already started." Sarah realized that what had begun as a silent cry of pain was now a living stream of hope, and that no court decision could erase, no statistic could measure, no trauma could destroy. But there was something in Elijah's eyes these past few days, something Sarah knew well, a kind of uneasiness he couldn't hide. When she asked what it was, he replied, "Mommy, I dreamed about the new house. But it wasn't just ours." And that stuck with her. A new house, with more people. Elijah had always had dreams like that. And many had already come true. Maybe he was seeing more than she could imagine. Maybe something new was about to happen. The courtroom was packed. There were journalists, community members, social workers, legal representatives, and people who weren't even part of the proceedings but had been there from the beginning. It was as if the day had become a public event. And, in a way, it was. Sarah walked in with her head held high, Elijah holding hands at her side. She wore a simple light blue dress and carried the Bible against her chest. It was her invisible armor. And that day, more than ever, she knew she wasn't there just for herself. She was there for so many other invisible mothers. Judge Thomas Whitaker was already in the room, seated, silent. His eyes closed for a moment, as if praying without anyone noticing. He knew that day would mark not just an end, but a new beginning. And new beginnings always come at a high price. The lawyers took their positions. The prosecutor, now more restrained, would not raise any further objections. Everything had already been laid out. All the evidence was on the table. And the only one who hadn't yet spoken was him, a judge. The decision was in his hands. Sarah looked at Elijah, who was drawing something on a piece of paper with a blue crayon. "What are you doing, son?" she whispered. And he replied, "Drawing pictures of us in the new house. With the other kids." It sent a shiver down her spine. Because he still saw the future with hope, even after everything. The judge cleared his throat. He opened an envelope, then another. He touched the papers as if touching wounds, carefully, with heaviness, with reverence. And then he began to speak, quietly, slowly, as if choosing each word with his heart in his hand. "This case has exposed the flaws in a system that was supposed to protect. And, at the same time, it has revealed the strength of those who never had power, but always had faith. What we have here is not just a legal case. It's a story of survival." Sarah squeezed her son's hand. Elijah looked at her with those same eyes, calm, deep, trusting, as if saying without words, "It's going to be okay, Mom. God is here." And she believed. The judge continued, "It took a child writing a letter for us adults to remember what humanity means." And then he paused for a long time. So long that everyone held their breath. And for a few seconds, he just looked at Sarah. No one moved. Not the sound of pens. Not the keyboards. It was as if the world had stopped. And in that silence, something was happening. Something that words couldn't describe. It was the presence of weight, of justice, of responsibility. Then he said, "I find, based on the evidence presented, the character testimony, and a thorough review of the entire record, that Ms. Sarah Lynn Matthews is innocent of all charges. Furthermore, she is found to be the victim of a serious miscarriage of justice." There was a collective gasp. An air that had been trapped for months. Sarah closed her eyes and cried. Elijah hugged her tightly and whispered, "I knew it, Mom. I knew it." But the judge wasn't finished yet. He held up a document. "This court orders that proceedings be initiated for public compensation for moral and emotional damages, as well as the immediate rehabilitation of Ms. Matthews's image." It was more than justice. It was redemption. But the most powerful part came next. He closed the folder. And he was silent. For more than 20 seconds, he said nothing else. He just stared at Sarah. And when he finally spoke, his voice was choked. "I failed you," was all he said. And in that moment the room burst into tears. Not out of sadness, but out of a truth that is rarely spoken. Because when justice acknowledges its failure, something supernatural happens. Sarah stood up. She looked at the judge and said without arrogance but firmly, "You have not failed me. It was God who used you to fix what was broken." And at that moment the judge looked down. For the first time visibly touched. Elijah then asked to speak. With the innocence of a boy who still believes his words have power. "Can I say something?" The judge nodded. And he said, "Can we bring other children to live with us? There are many who still don't have a mother or a judge." It struck like a bolt of lightning. Silent yet devastating. Because amidst his personal victory, Elijah thought of others. Those left behind. Those unseen. And there something was born. An idea. Purpose. A new beginning with a name and a face. Sarah received a standing ovation as she left the courtroom. But what no one knew was that that night, while everyone celebrated, she was writing a new prayer. A prayer that said, "Lord, if all this suffering has helped me see what you want from me, then show me the next step." Because the judge's decision wasn't the end of the story. It was just the end of a chapter. And the story that was beginning now wasn't just about Sarah anymore. Nor just about Elijah. It was about all the forgotten. About giving a voice to the silent. A home to the homeless. Faith to those who lost everything. But before she could fully understand this new calling, something unexpected happened. An envelope was left on her doorstep. No return address. No explanation. Inside only an old photograph. And on the back 3 handwritten words. "You need to know." The photo in the envelope showed 3 people. A young woman, a dark-haired man, and a baby in his arms. Sarah recognized the baby immediately. It was Elijah. But the adults' faces weren't hers or Michael's. She felt her heart race. That image posed an unspoken question. A hidden truth. On the back the handwritten words trembled. "You need to know." No signature. No address. Just that. Sarah took the photo inside, closed the door and sat in the kitchen. The wind blew through the half-open window, as if the air itself knew something new was about to happen. She looked at Elijah, who was reading a book on the couch. Calm. So peaceful. She wanted to shield him from this, but felt she couldn't ignore it. He called Jennifer the investigator. He explained about the photo. Within an hour, Jennifer was at her house. They analyzed it together. The photo looked old but well preserved. In the bottom corner, a seal from a hospital in Indiana. Jennifer made some connections, and what she discovered would leave anyone breathless. The woman in the photo was Sarah's sister. A sister she believed had died at birth. The truth came crashing down. Sarah had been separated from her sister as a baby, during a birth complication. The family never spoke of it. Her mother kept the secret until her death. And now someone, perhaps a distant relative, was trying to undo the knots of the past. Sarah watched it all with teary eyes. A sister. Alive. And with a direct connection to Elijah. Jennifer promised to investigate further, but said that in the meantime, she should focus on the new chapter that was opening. Because the past was surfacing, yes, but the future was knocking even harder. In the following days, news of the court decision spread. Sarah was contacted by NGOs, churches, and even schools. Everyone wanted to hear her. But what caught the most attention was the city's invitation. They wanted to transform the abandoned house in the neighborhood into a temporary home for at-risk mothers and children. Elijah heard everything and jumped for joy. "Mommy, it's the new house. The one from my dreams." Sarah laughed through her tears. "Could it be that this is what God was showing you, son?" And he replied with the certainty of someone who sees beyond. "It was. And there will be children who will smile inside." With the community's help, donations began to pour in. A team of volunteers stepped in to renovate the place. In less than 2 months, the walls were painted, the rooms were set up, and a small sign was installed at the entrance. "Casa Esperanza, where love lives." Sarah was appointed project coordinator. It wasn't about status. It was about mission. She now woke up every day with purpose. Not just to care for her own son, but to welcome children and mothers everywhere. Women who, like her, had been judged, forgotten, and silenced. The first group arrived on a Monday morning. A mother with 2 young daughters, fleeing an abusive relationship. Sarah welcomed them with a long hug. "You're safe here. No one will take you away from your girls here." The woman cried for 10 minutes without stopping. Elijah helped as much as he could. Organizing toys, painting murals on the walls, reading stories to the younger children. He became a small beacon in that place. A child who refused to be broken. A living example that hope can be born even in the driest of soil. One night, an 8-year-old girl woke up crying. She was afraid of the dark. Elijah sat beside her and said, "When I was afraid, my mother would pray with me. Do you want us to pray?" The girl nodded. And the two, holding hands, whispered together, "Lord, stay with us." Sarah watched it all with a full heart. It wasn't just the end of a journey. It was the beginning of a mission. And she knew she hadn't gotten this far by chance. Every tear, every injustice, every cry. It was all part of a path that now made sense. The letter from the boy at the shelter arrived weeks later. He said that, because of Elijah's little book, he decided to write a letter to his own mother, even though he didn't know where she was. "Maybe someone will find her. And if they do, she'll know I still love her." Sarah cried as she read it. Because that was the real impact. Not the applause. Not the praise. But the hearts touched. The souls reconnected. The homes rebuilt with bricks of faith, love, and resilience. At the first Thanksgiving service in the new house, the room was too small for so many people. There were mothers with children in their arms, volunteers with tears in their eyes, and a song being softly sung. "God watches over me in the shadow of his wings." And no one there wanted that moment to end. But in the midst of all the celebration, the phone rang. It was Jennifer. She had located Sarah's sister. Her name was Rachel. And she was alive. She lived less than 100 miles away. What's more, she had learned about Sarah and wanted to meet her. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. A new door was opening. And this time it wasn't out of pain but out of reconnection. A piece of the past was returning, not to hurt, but to heal what was missing. Elijah jumped for joy. "I'm going to have an aunt." Sarah laughed. "Yes, my love. And maybe she needs us as much as we need her." And in that moment she understood. The most beautiful new beginnings aren't the ones we plan. They're the ones God writes. The following Sunday Rachel appeared. Her eyes were identical to Sarah's. The embrace was long, silent, filled with something only heaven could explain. And Elijah, from the height of his childlike wisdom, said, "I think our house could use an extra bedroom." Because when the story seemed to be over, God showed that there were still chapters to be written. And that each life touched, each mother welcomed, each child protected, was a seed planted in a soil that was once despair but now flourished. And there was one last moment. One last scene. The local newspaper reporter asked, "Sarah, what would you say to someone who's going through what you went through today?" She thought for a moment and then said, "I would say it, well, even if it's quietly, even if no one hears. Because God hears." And with that the camera was turned off. But the story, oh, that story, still echoed in their hearts. Because in the end what remained was this. The love that never gives up, the faith that persists, and the new beginning that no one believed possible. Have you ever felt like the whole world had turned against you, and yet something inside told you not to give up? Sarah and Elijah's story isn't just about injustice. It's about faith amidst chaos. It's about a mother who didn't give in, even when everything around her screamed for her to stop. And it's about a boy who, with a blue pencil and simple words, taught more than 1,000 speeches. How many times have you found yourself fighting with what little you had, trying to protect those you love, even without knowing if you would have the strength for the next day? And deep down, isn't that what life is made of? Of small acts of courage. Of prayers whispered in the dark. Of hugs that hold the world together. Of homes that rise from the ashes, when all seemed lost. Maybe you know a Sarah. Maybe you are one. Maybe, like Elijah, you're silently carrying an entire world inside your chest. But know this. No pain is invisible to God. No effort goes unnoticed. No tear is wasted. If this story touched you, I invite you not to keep it to yourself. Share it. Spread hope. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because each new story could be exactly what someone needs to hear to keep going. Oh, tell me, have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever been saved by a prayer that no one heard? Or did you feel God carrying you when you could no longer walk? Write your thoughts in the comments. Let's transform this space into a refuge of truth, healing, and faith.